Hello, everybody. Welcome. Wearing these things again. Love it. Welcome back to Science on Screen. It's interesting that tonight we're doing a Science on Screen presentation, which is an initiative of the Coolidge Corner Theatre with major support from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. And this is a national initiative that many different cinemas take part in. We mount our own screenings and discussion series because somebody got the idea that nationally we may have a problem with science education and people understanding science. I don't see any issue right now. I don't know if you guys do. Just kidding. Yes, obviously we need more interface between general audiences and science, and that's what this is. And we're so lucky tonight to have a really esteemed scientist to join us for a discussion after this ridiculous movie. So I want to thank everybody for showing up. Whether you showed up for the important science discussion or the ridiculous movie, or both, like me, that I hope you enjoy both parts of this evening. So I'm going to introduce our guest in just a moment, but first I wanted to just talk about this movie. This is made by, written and directed by the late great Larry Cohen. It's a really fun movie. It's absurd, it's sort of ridiculous, it's intentionally so. Larry Cohen's a really smart guy, really smart satirist, and this movie will make you laugh, you will gasp sometimes at the absurdity of the premise. We hope that you will also respect the film and respect the people in the audience by not yelling out dumb stuff during the movie. So, and don't yell out smart stuff during the movie, frankly. Doctor, that applies to you, please, especially. So let me introduce, bring up to the stage our special guest. This is going to be a long intro, so you might stay seated just for the time being. Dr. Krystle Zuniga is our guest, and she is a PhD, RD, LD, registered dietitian in UT Health Austin, in many UT Health Austin clinics. She is both part of UT Health Austin's integrated behavioral health team and the Calm Care team. She specializes in using evidence-based nutrition to develop individualized nutrition care plans. She is also an assistant professor in the Dell Medical School Department of Oncology. She is a translational nutritional scientist, and she conducts basic clinical and epidemiological research to understand how nutrition and physical activity may promote physical and cognitive health in cancer survivors and older adults. She is smart, in short. And she has agreed to join us here at no cost. I didn't go over that with you, but there's not going to be any after this film, to conduct a discussion that is going to be so interesting that we have this on the subject of junk food. Are we eating it, or is it eating us? And I hope you guys will hang around afterwards. And think of, as you're watching this movie, many questions will come to mind. I hope you all just kind of make a mental note of some of those questions so that once we have our discussion at the end, you will ask Dr. Zuniga some of her thoughts about some of your questions about junk food, about diet, and about how diet applies to all of us. Any issues of diet. But now I'd like to bring to the stage to very briefly say hi. Dr. Zuniga, could you come on up and join us?
Hi, I'm Krystle. I really appreciate this opportunity to bring science and communicate science. As you said, there's a lot of misinformation around science, and especially around nutrition and health. So I'd love to hear your questions and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. It's going to be a barn burner, I promise you, everybody.
It's a funny movie, I think.
Oh, and she also loved the movie. That's how smart she is. She loved this movie. Thank you. Enjoy. We have even more. That's an acceptable evening's entertainment in and of itself. But we have even more, because I'd like to welcome back to the stage Dr. Krystle Zuniga. Thank you for being here. Thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed that documentary. Of course, now of course it's not a documentary. In fact, it's wow, those are comfortable chairs, aren't they? Yeah. It's a fanciful sort of representation of good guys and bad guys, but it does use names like Food and Drug Administration and so forth. So I'm kind of curious, in fact, like how are foods regulated? Is it really just bribes? Is that how it works?
I think, well, one thing is that the way our food is regulated is USDA is what governs our meat and poultry and some egg products. FDA governs eggs. Okay, so EPA is governing pesticides, fungicides, and water. But bottled water is governed by the FDA. And so not to get into everything, but just like an understanding of how complex our food system is governed by, definitely this stuff would be regulated by the FDA. And what they do talk about is that, oh, this was FDA approved. One thing is that our foods are not FDA approved. That's one. I mean, this was a movie in 1985. Things have definitely changed in the way it's governed, but the FDA doesn't give a stamp of approval on food.
I see.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to just start a food product and put it out in stores and restaurants and bodegas around the country, can I just do that?
Yeah. Yeah, not to instill fear, but food, we're not gonna have this, hopefully, in our lifetime. But what it does get into is there are food additives that are allowed to be in food. So a food company should be using additives that have been approved. And if they are introducing a new additive, then yes, that would require FDA approval. So we do have this list of what they're called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. And these are ingredients that are generally recognized as safe. Okay? And so a food company can put any of those ingredients in their food and it'd be okay to have in the food system. But an interesting thing where I think there is a lot of maybe concern is that if they want to introduce something new, the food additive approval process takes a long time. It can take several years for it to be approved. So what they can do is call their new additive GRAS, generally recognized as safe, without ever telling the FDA. They don't have to submit any paperwork to the FDA. And they can say that our panel of experts recognize that this is a safe ingredient.
I see.
Yeah.
Is that considered problematic? That sounds a little problematic.
Yeah, there is a little problematic because it is voluntary to submit that paperwork to the FDA that you've done this research. There is also no regulation on potential conflict of interest about who is on that panel of experts that's recognizing this ingredient as safe. So yeah, there's definitely concern about that. And the concern is though that the FDA was backlogged. So this process of kind of going a roundabout way was approved in 1997 because they were getting backlogged with trying to review all of these ingredients. So they kind of left it up to the food companies to do the research on whether it's safe.
All right, this is not making me feel a lot better, I gotta say.
Yeah, those things are concerning, for sure.
By the way, I want to ask a couple more questions, and after that I'm going to throw it to you guys, so I'm sure you guys are going to have some pretty great questions. But one other thing about this documentary is that the stuff is definitely an addictive substance, and we do know that certain foods are, they're addictive. If we don't have them, we crave them. So how does modern food technology kind of engineer that phenomenon of addictive foods, and what are the sort of potential dangers of having addictive foods?
Yeah, definitely our reward centers in our brain light up when something is sugar, salt, fat, that perfect combination. Also, these ingredients are really cheap. So it is easy to make a food product that tastes really good and that people want to eat more of, hopefully not like eating our insides like this movie. So there was actually a really interesting study that came out, published last year, done by the NIH. And what they had, I'm going to take some time to explain this study because I think it is really interesting. They had these people come to the NIH and there's metabolic wards. So they put them in their own room and they give them all of their food. So there's like everything's controlled. So they had 20 adults, 10 males, 10 females, and they got for 2 weeks either an ultra-processed food diet or a more like whole foods diet. And they were matched for the same amount of calories, same amount of protein, fat, sugar, fiber, all of that. But one was ultra-processed and one was regular. And then they said, eat as much as you want. So on the ultra-processed food diet, they ended up eating more than 500 extra calories, and they gained about 2 pounds a week. And then when they went to the whole foods diet unprocessed, they actually lost weight on that diet and they ate less calories. So that was really fascinating because even if you match for everything that you could possibly control, something about those ultra-processed foods and the way that they have this combination of ingredients made them eat more. They also asked them about their level of satisfaction and like flavor, and they actually didn't even rate the ultra-processed food diet as more satisfying either. So I think that's a really fascinating study. It just got published. It took a long time to do, obviously, and a lot of money because they controlled all of that and measured everything. So I think what they were getting into in that study was showing that there's something about ultra-processed foods that are getting people to eat more and kind of going over our self-governing regulation of food intake.
But we don't have that feeling of satiety from eating all of that. It's just we want more of it. You know, what you keep going back to that bag of potato chips, let's say, barbecue potato chips, which are delicious. Let's face it, because you kind of keep going back, and you're just eating more salted fat, but it has those elements in it that make you want more of it.
Right, and then that's providing extra calories, and then could be contributing to weight gain over time and other health issues. So yeah, the consequence is that, and they did measure hormone levels too, and saw that in the ultra-processed food diet, a level of a hormone called PYY, which regulates our ability to like stop and feel full, was lower on the ultra-processed food diet. So there's also something going on in our regulation system with that food.
You work in oncology as well, so cancer is obviously a thing that we really worry about. Everybody's going to be faced with cancer, whether with a loved one or with themselves. What role does like processed food play in that?
Well, there is quite a bit of research on dietary guidelines for recommendations for prevention or reducing the risk of cancer. I don't like saying prevention, I like saying reducing the risk because also it's just a biological thing that can happen. But yes, there's significant research associating overweight and obesity with cancer risk, and our latest cancer prevention guidelines recommend limiting processed foods, red meats, processed meats, and having a more plant-based diet. So there's significant research shown over and over again over many decades that a diet that's more plant-based, not necessarily vegetarian, but more plant-based, is associated with a reduced risk of cancer. Yeah.
I think sometimes we talk about additives and we just sort of like, that's a negative word in a way, but it's not necessarily negative. Some additives are negative. Is there a particularly sort of unhealthful additive that maybe has been banned or that has been restricted?
Yeah, and I think this is one that probably we've all seen in our lifetime was a trans fat ban. So trans fat is from hydrogenated oil. So they put hydrogen in oil. It makes it more stable, so you can fry it more. It has more shelf life. And actually, the person who discovered this won a Nobel Prize in the early 1900s. Well, then when we did research, that's when they found an association with trans fat intake and heart disease. And that research was coming out in the 90s. And there was actually quite a bit of pushback on publishing that type of research because trans fat was everywhere in the food system. And there's a nonprofit organization called the Center for Science of the Public Interest, and they put a petition out that, hey, we should at least label trans fat. There's research showing an association, negative health outcomes, we should label it. Labeling didn't come until 2006. So 13 years from the first petition and the research to actually add trans fat. In 2004, that same organization said this should actually not be in our food system at all. And actually it wasn't until 2020 where trans fat was completely out of our food system. So 2013, the FDA put a preliminary ruling. We need to get trans fat out of our food system. They always open things up to public comment, and that's where food industry comes in and does a lot of lobbying, and like this is going to require a lot of time and money. Finally, ruling came in 2015. Well, we need time to get this out of our food system, and so it just kind of drags on. So just a story as an example of research was in the 90s that this is unhealthy, and it took not until 2020 where it's out of our food system. Yeah.
When you say food industry, is that like craft? Is that like factory farmers? Like, what is the food industry?
That's a great question, yeah, because it's like, oh, the industry, like the man, like what is that? It's a lot of food companies, yeah, a lot of food companies, and even those food companies are part of associations that also do lobbying, but we could call food industry like agriculture and distributors. It's a big industry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just Kraft pushing for trans fat, but our farmers who make the oil that gets hydrogenated would have a stake in that type of thing.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a lot of people, and it's a big part of the economy probably. And you know, we think of them as a lot of billionaires, but it's also probably like a lot of like people driving a tractor in Georgia too. You know, that's the food industry as well.
Absolutely, and that's like an example too when there's a lot of public, concern about high fructose corn syrup. A lot of like we don't want this in our food anymore. Well, then what do we do with all this corn? And corn farmers who are getting subsidized for their corn crops. Now we don't have anywhere to take that corn.
Yeah, because we're all hipsters drinking this fancy Dr. Pepper. Right.
Yeah, I mean with sugar or like it's still the same thing, just from a different.
Right. Coming from a different crop. I wonder if we have any questions from our audience. This is a really we rarely have this ability to ask a world-renowned dietitian, a scientist at no costs. So who has a question here? Because I have a few more of my own. Yes, right back here.
So in your professional opinion, what would you consider the most dangerous modern day food?
Most dangerous modern day food.
Dangerous.
Danger.
It's very timely because of the film. We should all know.
And that's one thing too, we've got to consider the dose, right? The poison is in the dose. What was happening, for example, in this movie was that they were eating a ridiculous amount of that. So having a soda is not going to be harmful. Having pepperoni on a slice of pizza on a Friday night, that's not what's going to get you, right? And even in the way that we regulate food additives, and if they're governed as being safe, is how much of this is actually someone going to be exposed to? Because everything could kill you. So, I mean, it's true, even water, right, could kill us. But I think there are two things that we need to pay a little more attention to, nitrates and nitrites, which are in processed meats. There's more and more research about their carcinogenic properties in association with colorectal cancer, which is one cancer that's rising in young adults, which is really concerning. Another one is acrylamide, which is something that's formed from fried foods. Cooking carbs at really high temperatures has also been identified as a carcinogen, and now we're actually able to measure that in foods and measure how much people are consuming, and that's becoming a little more associated with cancer risk too. So I think if I had to say things to limit would be fried foods and processed meats, and the American Institute for Cancer Research in their latest cancer prevention guidelines does kind of touch on that a little bit more. So I think that is something that we should continue to try to limit in our diet.
Also, who wants to live forever? I
mean,
honestly.
But I'll say that with I love a pepperoni pizza and fries, but so it's about how much. So just limiting that exposure.
Great question, incredible question. Anybody else got a question from our audience here? Right back here, yeah.
Is there a big difference between natural sugar and corn syrup and that kind of?
Great question. Yeah. So that was like one example. I don't know when that trend kind of came on about high fructose corn syrup being the bad guy, and then we started replacing it with things like agave and honey and molasses and regular table sugar. The high fructose corn syrup that was actually used in our food system was about pretty similar to sucrose, table sugar. So sucrose is half glucose, half fructose. So a sucrose molecule is two compounds. High fructose corn syrup was about 50% glucose and 50% fructose. There were some higher fructose varieties that were more like the 60% fructose, but what the body sees molecularly was pretty similar. So they are pretty similar. Things like agave and honey are a little higher in fructose as well. But yeah, they're pretty similar structurally.
I may be in a conspiracy-minded bent, but does part of it kind of come down to like lobbying from, say, Domino, who have like, sugar cane fields and a sugar cane industry versus, does the dialogue kind of become affected by PR firms and lobbyists?
I think now we're seeing a lot more coming from influencers. I think most people have heard of her.
Wellness influencers, you mean?
Yes.
Yes.
I've heard like Food Babe, who has scared people about every ingredient. I don't know what you're allowed to eat anymore if you follow what she's talking about, but they have big followings, and then that stuff, and they break it down and communicate things in a very simplified way, which people can latch onto, and then that word of mouth and these infographics just go viral. I think the latest I don't know if you heard, the World Health Organization just coined the term infodemic, talking about the misinformation going through social media and how this is harming people. Like, these aren't experts, they just have a lot of followers, and their stuff gets viral. And real scientists who are in the labs doing the research don't have time to be on TikTok or Instagram, and so their messages aren't communicated as well. So the World Health Organization is trying to support and put out more people who are in the medical field and scientists, encouraging them to be a part of communicating science on social media.
So people are just making stuff up about like clean eating. That's the thing I've noticed a lot of people talk about, is clean eating. That's just made up stuff kind of?
I don't know what even that term means,
Yeah.
right?
You should know everything about food and eating, because
Yeah.
you've studied this for a
It's
while.
like clean eating, what is that?
Yes.
What does that mean? And people have different definitions. It could be limiting food additives, that's fine. But I also think that's also, kind of a privilege to be caring about the minuscule amounts of ingredients in our food when there are millions of people around the world that don't have adequate access to food. We're worrying about like BHT in a chip that we might eat occasionally. Not that these aren't things that like, oh, ignore, let industry do whatever. I definitely support we need to have some more checks in our food industry, but it's harmful that people who are perfectly healthy are now fearful of food. And I see that in my role as a dietitian, people who feel so overwhelmed with what to eat. It's like every meal is a stressor.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
When it's like a basic need, we need to eat. And then every time you eat, you're scared about what you're putting in your body. It's also harmful.
Which is, yeah, that's probably don't digest your food very well if you're worried about that green bean you just ate and you read an Instagram story that green beans are terrible for you. But you talk about sort of privilege, and I think that's really interesting, because we lots of places in the world have had famines, even as recently as the 20th century, and probably famines going on now as far as I know. But shelf stability and portability of food is maybe not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. Where there may be crop disruptions and diets that are difficult to sort of predict. Is that in fact true that those aren't necessarily bad things? Preservatives in and of themselves may not be bad things?
Yeah, I mean, salt is a preservative, sugar is a preservative, it's used in our foods, and I think we saw a little bit of this during COVID, like getting access to fresh produce. Like, there was supply chain disruptions that happened. So if you had shelf-stable food at home, that was good. Or during our snowpocalypse, it was good that I had canned vegetables and soup to eat. So, I mean, even here in the US and access to food, those things can happen. So having those preservatives can be helpful in those situations.
I have bags and bags of lentils if anybody needs some.
We have lots of canned soup and cereal.
Yeah.
But also considering that some people that are on things like SNAP benefits or WIC benefits might only be grocery shopping once a month and need food that's going to last them for the rest of the month. So having access to healthy produce is not an option for some people.
Yeah, here in Austin, we're enormously lucky to be able to go and get, like, H-E-B's incredible. I mean, I guess they're a sponsor, yes, but they're incredible. You got Whole Foods and you got Central Market. Like, we really have a wealth of options. But I've been on vacation or stopped through like small towns, and it's awful. Like, there isn't really good produce. It seems like there's really an economic disparity, between where you live and what kind of food you can get.
Absolutely, yeah. Even in rural areas or even in big city areas, but they're not by the Whole Foods or the H-E-B, and they have their convenience store, which might have produce, but it's overpriced. And their dollar doesn't go as far there because it's more expensive. So yeah, we definitely have to kind of recognize that privilege that we have and that access to food. The average SNAP benefit, also people might know it as food stamps, is $125 a month. That's the average benefit. And half of the people who are receiving SNAP benefits are children. And so think like, how far would $125 get you?
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to avoid food additives and things like that, how far would that actually get somebody? Mm-hmm.
I've been hearing the phrase food desert a lot recently. Is that what sort of what that means? Is it areas?
Yeah, areas that don't have access to healthful foods, and there are like local initiatives that try to bring like mobile food pantries or mobile farmers markets into those areas to try to provide access. That's really at like tiny local levels and not at the large scale that it should be.
Mm-hmm.
There are some local levels where SNAP benefits could be used at a farmer's market, and actually some areas double the benefit if you're using it at a farmer's market. Again, those are things that at the advocacy level we could do about pushing for that in our local area so that those benefits do go farther for people.
Mm-hmm. That's so important. I wonder if we have maybe one more question from our audience. I see a hand right over here.
Hi, so my question is, as a dietitian, watching this movie, there's a moment where the dad says, where he's talking to his son, and he talks about how there's lots of things that you eat that are still alive. As a dietitian, and a person who helps people live healthier, what do you recommend as far as things to eat that are still alive?
Did everybody hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probiotics. I mean, the microbiome is a new thing that people are amazed about, and I think it is amazing. Like, we were able to sequence the human microbiome and start to understand the bacteria that are in us, and that we have such a cool symbiotic relationship with them, and we're learning more and more. Unfortunately, what I see with that though is like every time we have these new health trends in science, industry's like, all right, we can make money off of this, right? There's microbiome testing. Scientists don't even know what to do with that information yet. We're still teasing through that data, right? So, okay, you find out you have these bacteria in your gut, then what? They're adding probiotics to everything, and turning things like high-calorie beverages, putting probiotics, and people think it's helpful as well. But I went off on a tangent there, but yes, because probiotics, yes, are living organisms, traditionally found in yogurt, but also like kefir, kombucha, sauerkraut. So that's a way to introduce some bacteria, but also just eating fiber from plants can do a lot more for our microbiome than just consuming live probiotics. Because probiotics from food, that's just a small amount, like maybe a couple of strains of bacteria, when there are literally thousands of different strains in our gut. Even a probiotic supplement, they might have 20 different strains, but that we have much more in our gut. So what's in a probiotic pill is just what scientists have been able to grow and put in a capsule and get in us, not necessarily that they have a health benefit yet.
Does it even make it to the gut?
So that's a big question, yeah. In some of these studies, they've given these supplements and then they do stool samples to measure the gut bacteria. Sometimes they don't find any of those bacteria. Because when you think that far down, the large intestine is primarily anaerobic bacteria, so a lot of bacteria that don't survive well in oxygen. So when you're exposing them to oxygen in a pill,
right.
Yeah.
This is the first time the phrase stool sample's ever been used on this stage.
Yeah.
Right over here.
So, my friend just talked about probiotics. He was telling me about prebiotics, which I was like, that sounds made up. Like, is that a thing, or what is that?
Yeah, so the probiotics are the living organisms, and what they eat are prebiotics. So prebiotics would be fiber. And again, that's another thing that's now sold on shelves or have added prebiotic. You can get prebiotics from eating fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, legumes. So again, you gotta be careful. Like when these things get trendy, food industry is ready to hop on it and sell you something that you could get from a whole food as well.
We might just need to destroy capitalism. That might be like the key.
Yeah, a little bit. When you think about the food industry, if you're into food industry and politics about it, Marion Nestle is a leader in this field. She has a book called Food Politics and a blog. But really it's like, yes, we want to attack food industry about this one ingredient and this is dangerous, and it's just like, it's bigger than that. It's way bigger than that. And anytime someone's mad about an ingredient, it gets removed from the food product, then they put something else in, right? And then
they're just endlessly incentivized to do so. Like, why would they do that?
Yeah, and it's quick to do.
Sure, yeah, why not?
Yeah.
It's one big hustle.
Yeah. We're not here to shame anything about food.
No.
It's a bigger problem.
You told me earlier that you wanted to talk about food shaming, and I didn't know what that meant, so I'm gonna ask you about that right now.
Yeah. No, I see that a lot in working in oncology, that I hear this from my patients, like, well, should you really be eating that? You have cancer, or I heard this, and like, it's such a privilege, first of all, to be thinking that they have access to healthful foods, or like not even knowing what that person is going through. There's weight shaming, there's also food shaming and judging what is in people's grocery carts. It's their life, you don't know their income, you don't know their health status, and I think, again, I work with people too who feel scared to eat in front of other people because they don't want to be judged, or people like recovering from eating disorders and having people comment on how much they're eating or they're eating too much.
Yeah.
And I just see a lot in my practice, very unhealthy relationships with food. So I'm not only concerned about the health of the food, but also what is your relationship with food. Because it is something that we have to do every day, multiple times a day, is eat, and to have stress around that, or stress of what other people are gonna think about what you're eating, is unhealthy.
No, I think that's absolutely true. I want to ask one last question, and then we're going to wrap it up. Dr. Zuniga, you've been wonderful. It's been so nice to have you here, so thank you for being here. I just got to ask, like, this kombucha, it tastes awful. It feels like there must be something virtuous about drinking this kombucha. Is there?
No.
Yeah.
If you like it, drink it.
Okay, I don't have to drink it?
It is something that has probiotics
I
in
can tell my
it.
girlfriend not to buy it
Yeah.
anymore? Okay, all right.
And be very careful if you make it at home, because you might end up growing something that you don't want to grow. And yeah, that actually a lot of
botulism toxin or
yeah,
something? Okay,
the
all right.
kombuchas on the market now, some of them what they do is they pasteurize it, so they kill all the bacteria, and then they add a controlled amount in there.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, just to sum that up, don't ever drink kombucha. All right.
Not from your neighbor. Yeah, don't get your neighbor's back to kombucha.
It's been so much fun. The movie was great, and then you came up and you talked to us, and we learned a lot, and we're not going to feel bad about eating bacon a lot anymore. So, thank you. Okay, maybe not. Maybe we both felt a little bad, but that's what makes it so good. But thank you for joining us, and we really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. And did you guys enjoy it? Yeah. Thank you very much. All right, everybody. Drive carefully.